The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people had looked up at the night sky and wondered what secrets waited in the darkness between worlds. When humans finally built ships that could travel faster than light, they expected to find wonders. They expected to find answers. What they found instead was a galaxy that had already been claimed. The Galactic Concord was an alliance of 12 ancient species. They had ruled the stars for longer than human civilization had existed. Their technology was beyond anything Earth scientists could understand. Their cities floated in the clouds of gas giants. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days. And when humanity arrived at their doorstep, they looked down at the newcomers the way a person might look at an insect crawling across their floor. Commander. Lucia Vance had been chosen to represent Earth at the Concord's Great Council. She was 42 years old, with silver streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. She had commanded Earth's first deep space exploration vessel. She had negotiated with 3 alien species before humanity even knew the Concord existed. The United Nations believed she was the best person for this impossible job. Standing in the council chamber, surrounded by beings that towered over her and glowed with inner light, Lucia had never felt so small. The Thyrani ambassador floated before her. His body was made of living crystal, and light moved through him like blood through veins. When he spoke, his voice rang like bells in a church. "Humanity wishes to join the Galactic Concord," he said. It was not a question. "We do," Lucia replied. Her voice was steady, even though her heart pounded in her chest. "We also ask for help. There is a threat approaching our space. The Veth swarm. We have seen what they did to the Corvani colonies. We cannot fight them alone." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled aliens. The Thyrni ambassador's crystals flickered with what Lucia had learned was their version of laughter. "The Veth are indeed dangerous," he admitted. "They have consumed entire civilizations, but the Concord has contained them. They will not trouble us." "They are troubling us," Lucia pressed. "Their scouts have already reached our outer colonies. Our ships cannot match their technology. Our weapons barely scratch their hulls. If we do not receive help, humanity will be destroyed." The chamber fell silent. The ancient beings looked at each other in ways that Lucia could not read. Finally, the Thyrani ambassador spoke again. "The Concord does not simply give away our technology," he said. "Lesser species must prove themselves worthy. However, we are not without mercy. We will give humanity a gift. A vessel from our own fleets. With it, you may defend your borders until you have evolved enough to join us properly." Lucia felt hope bloom in her chest. A Concord warship. With that kind of firepower, they might actually have a chance. "Thank you," she said. "The people of Earth are grateful." The Thyrani ambassador's crystals flickered again. That laughter, that cold, cruel laughter. "Save your thanks until you have seen our gift, Commander." 3 weeks later, Lucia stood in the cargo bay of Earth's largest orbital station. Beside her was Dimitri Okonkwo, her chief engineer. He was a large man with gray in his beard and grease permanently stained into his hands. He had built humanity's first FTL drive from scratch. There was nothing mechanical that he could not fix, but when the Concord's gift was towed into the dock, even Dimitri could not hide his horror. The ship was enormous. That much was true. It stretched nearly a kilometer from bow to stern, with massive engine pods and what had once been elegant weapon mounts along its hull. But it was also falling apart. Great holes had been torn in the outer plating, patched with metal that did not match. The weapon mounts were empty, stripped down to bare connectors. One of the engine pods flickered and died even as they watched. The ship drifted like a corpse, cold and dark and utterly lifeless. "This is a joke," Dimitri breathed. "This has to be a joke." The Thyrani ambassador's hologram shimmered into existence beside them. His crystal body glowed with that same cold amusement. "The vessel is called the Discarded Blade," he said. "It served the Corvani Empire for 300 years before it was decommissioned. The Concord believes it will be adequate for humanity's needs." Lucia stared at the wreck. She thought about the Veth swarm, their living ships hungry for human flesh. She thought about the colonies that would burn, the children who would scream, the worlds that would fall silent. The weapons, she said quietly. Where are the weapons? Removed, I am afraid. Concord regulations prevent us from arming species that have not yet proven themselves. The FTL drive? Functional, mostly. It may require some ... adjustment. The AI core? Wiped clean. A security precaution, you understand. Lucia turned to face the hologram. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with a cold fire that made even the ancient Thyrany pause. You've given us a corpse, she said. You expect us to die. The ambassador's crystals shifted. We expect you to do your best, Commander. As all young species must. If humanity is meant to survive, it will find a way. If not, he paused and there was no kindness in his voice. Then the galaxy will continue, as it always has. Without you. The hologram flickered and vanished. Lucia stood in silence for a long moment. The broken ship hung before her, a monument to alien contempt. Behind her, she could hear Dmitri cursing under his breath. Then she began to laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who had been pushed to the edge and discovered that the edge was not the end. It was just the beginning, Commander. Dmitri asked carefully. Are you all right? Lucia turned to him. The fire in her eyes had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown brighter. They think we are insects, she said. They think we will crawl into that wreck and die quietly. They have no idea what they have done. What do you mean? Lucia looked back at the ship, at its broken hull and empty weapons and dying engines, and she saw something that the Concord, in all their ancient wisdom, completely failed to understand. She saw potential. Humans have been fighting with broken tools since we lived in caves, she said. We turned sticks into spears. We turned rocks into fire. We took every obstacle the universe threw at us, and we transformed it into a weapon. She smiled, and it was the smile of a predator waking from a long sleep. They have given us junk, Dmitri, and we are going to turn it into something that will make them afraid. Dmitri looked at the ship. Then he looked at his commander. Slowly, a matching smile spread across his weathered face. Well then, he said, I suppose we had better get to work. In the cold silence of space, aboard a ship that had been left to die, humanity began to build a monster. 6 months passed. The Galactic Concord forgot about humanity. They had more important matters to attend to. Trade disputes between ancient empires. Border conflicts with species that had been fighting for millennia. The small blue planet and its desperate people were nothing more than a footnote in their records. Another young species that would rise and fall like countless others before them. But aboard the ship that humanity had renamed the UES Defiance. Something extraordinary was happening. Commander Lucia Vance assembled a crew unlike anything the military had ever seen. Yes, there were engineers. The best Earth had to offer. There were physicists who had written papers on faster-than-light travel. There were weapons experts who had spent their careers studying how to break things in creative ways. But there were also artists, philosophers, historians, who specialized in ancient warfare. Poets who saw patterns in chaos, musicians who understood rhythm and timing in ways that computers could not replicate. When the admirals back on Earth questioned her choices, Lucia had given them a simple answer. The aliens think in straight lines, she said. Their technology has not changed in 10,000 years because they believe they have already found the best solutions. They cannot imagine doing things differently. We need people who can imagine the impossible. The work began with the reactor. The Corvani had designed their ships to run on refined thallium crystals. These crystals were rare and expensive, found only in a handful of systems controlled by the Concord. Humanity had none. The aliens had expected this to be the first of many failures. But Dr. Sarah Chen, a physicist who had been denied funding for her impossible theories for 20 years, looked at the Corvani reactor and saw something the aliens had missed. The reactor did not actually need thallium. Thallium was simply the easiest fuel source. The reactor was designed to convert matter into energy, and matter came in many forms. It is like they built a car that only runs on premium fuel, she explained to Lucia. But the engine does not care. It just wants something to burn. So we give it something else. Within 3 weeks, the Defiance was running on nuclear fusion. Earth had been using fusion power for decades. They had plenty of fuel. And when Dr. Chen finished her modifications, the reactor was not running at 40% efficiency anymore. It was running at 120%. The engine pods came next. Dmitry Okonkwo spent 2 months living inside the massive machines, sleeping only a few hours each night. The Corvini design was elegant but fragile. It had been built by a species that had never faced true adversity, never had to make something work with limited resources. Dmitry was not elegant. He was practical. He ripped out the delicate components that kept failing and replaced them with human technology. It was cruder. It was louder. It was also twice as reliable. The aliens build their ships like sculptures, he told Lucia one evening, his face covered in grease and his eyes bright with exhaustion. Beautiful, but useless when things go wrong. Humans build things like tools. They might be ugly, but they will work even when everything else is falling apart. The weapons were the biggest challenge. The discarded blade had been designed for energy lances. These were sophisticated weapons that fired beams of concentrated light capable of melting through enemy hulls. The Concorde considered them the pinnacle of military technology. Every advanced species in the galaxy used them, but the weapon mounts were empty. The energy lance technology had been stripped away, and humanity had no way to replicate it. For weeks, the weapons team struggled. They tried to reverse engineer the alien systems. They tried to adapt human laser technology. Nothing worked. The ship remained toothless, and every day brought the Veth swarm closer to human space. Then a young historian named Marcus Webb asked a simple question. Why do we need energy weapons at all? The weapons experts stared at him. Marcus was 26 years old and had never fired a gun in his life. His specialty was ancient Roman military tactics. He had no business being in a weapons meeting. But Lucia had learned to listen to everyone on her. Crew, explain, she said. Marcus pulled up his tablet and showed them images from history. Catapults, crossbows, cannons, guns. For most of human history, we fought with kinetic weapons, he said. We threw rocks. We shot arrows. We fired bullets. We did not need fancy energy beams. We just needed to hit things hard enough to break them. The weapons chief, a woman named Colonel Rivera, shook her head. Kinetic weapons are useless against modern shields. Every species in the galaxy abandoned them thousands of years ago, did they? Marcus asked. Or did they just assume they were useless because energy weapons were easier? That night, Colonel Rivera began running simulations. She discovered something remarkable. Alien shields were designed to absorb and deflect energy, light, heat, radiation. They were incredibly effective against energy lances. But they were not designed for solid objects moving at extreme speeds. A railgun slug traveling at a fraction of the speed of light would pass through an energy shield like it was not even there. The galaxy had abandoned kinetic weapons because they seemed primitive. They had never bothered to test them against modern defenses. It had never occurred to them that the old ways might still work. Within a month, the Defiance bristled with railguns. Massive electromagnetic cannons that could fire tungsten. Slugs at velocities no energy shield could stop. But the greatest innovation came. Last, the Corvani had designed their ships to be controlled by artificial intelligence. The AI would handle navigation, weapons, life support, and 1,000 other systems. A crew was almost unnecessary. The ship would think for itself. The Defiance had no AI. Its core had been wiped. Clean, most engineers would have tried to rebuild it. They would have programmed a new artificial mind to control the ship. But a neuroscientist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka had a different idea. What if the ship did not need a computer brain? She asked. What if it had a human brain instead? She designed a neural interface, a direct link between a human mind and the ship's systems. The pilot would not control the ship through buttons and screens. They would feel the ship as an extension of their own body. Every sensor would become a new sense. Every weapon would become a new limb. Commander Lucia Vance volunteered to be the first test subject. When they connected her to the Defiance, she screamed. The flood of information was overwhelming. She could feel the ship around her like a second skin. She could sense the cold of space against the hull. She could hear the hum of the reactor like a heartbeat. And she could feel something else. Something unexpected. The ship was not empty. It was not dead. 300 years of service had left an echo in its systems. Memories of battles fought. Crew members who had lived and died within its walls. A ghost of identity that had somehow survived even the Concorde's attempt to erase it. When Lucia opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face, she spoke in a voice that was not entirely her own. "It is not just a ship anymore," she whispered. "It is alive, and it remembers what they did to it. It remembers being thrown away like garbage." Her hands clenched into fists. "It wants revenge." Dmitri looked at the ship with new eyes. At its scarred hull and rebuilt engines and deadly new weapons. "What have we created?" he asked quietly. Lucia smiled. It was not a kind smile. "A monster," she said. "And soon the galaxy will learn to fear it." The Veth swarm came without warning. One moment, the sensors at humanity's outer colonies showed empty space. The next moment, 100 hive ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel like predators emerging from darkness. They did not send messages. They did not demand surrender. They simply began to move toward the human settlements with terrible, silent purpose. Admiral Chen Wei received the distress calls aboard his flagship, the EU's Resilience. He was 63 years old, a veteran of humanity's first interstellar conflicts. He had seen battles before, but he had never seen anything like this. The Veth ships were not built from metal. They were grown. Living organisms the size of mountains with hulls made of black chitin and weapons that pulsed with biological energy. Each ship contained millions of drones, mindless creatures bred for a single purpose: to consume, to spread, to destroy everything in their path. The Concorde had warned humanity about the swarm. They had shown them recordings of what the Veth had done to other species. Entire planets stripped of life. Civilizations that had existed for thousands of years, reduced to nothing but bones and ash. Admiral Chen looked at the tactical display and felt cold. Fear settled in his stomach. Humanity had 47 ships. Patrol frigates designed for police work. Mining vessels that had been hastily fitted with weapons. Research ships that had no business being anywhere near a battlefield. Against 100 Veth hive ships, they would last perhaps an hour. "Send a message to the Galactic Concorde," he ordered. "Tell them we need immediate assistance." The response came back within minutes. The Thyrone ambassador's voice was calm, almost bored. "The Concorde's nearest fleet is 3 weeks away. We will send memorial services to honor humanity's sacrifice. Your species will be remembered." The transmission ended. Admiral Chen stood in silence. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. He could see the fear in their eyes, the knowledge that they were about to die. "Launch all ships," he said quietly. "We will form a defensive line at the colony's orbit. If we can buy enough time, the civilian transports might escape." It was not much of a plan, but it was all they had. Then a new contact appeared on the sensors. A single ship emerging from FTL at the edge of the system. It was large, nearly a kilometer long. Its hull was scarred and patched. Its design was unlike anything in Earth's fleet, but Admiral Chen recognized it immediately. The Defiance had arrived. "Commander?" Wah. Oh, wand, wando wana dopo wando wamdo wandon wantar and obs onward and the lids on no one so on whenward. It was calm and steady, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the end of the world. Admiral Chen, this is the Defiance. We are ready to engage. Chen felt a spark of hope flicker in his chest. The Defiance had been upgraded. He had read the reports. But one ship against 100. Commander, join the defensive formation. We need every ship we can get. There was a pause. When Lucia spoke again, there was something different in her voice. Something hard and cold and utterly unafraid. Negative, Admiral. I am not here to defend. I am here to attack. On the bridge of the Defiance, Lucia Vance closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. The neural interface activated. Suddenly, she was no longer inside the ship. She was the ship. She could feel the railguns mounted along her hull like muscles waiting to flex. She could sense the reactor burning in her core like a heart-pumping fire. She could see the Veth swarm through 1,000 sensors. It ship a dark spot in the fabric of space, and beneath her own thoughts, she felt the ship's ancient anger. 300 years of service, 300 years of loyalty, and then abandonment, betrayal, left to rot in a scrapyard while younger ships took its place. The Defiance remembered, and it wanted blood. All stations report ready, Dimitri's voice came through the communication system. Railguns are charged. The reactor is at full power. FTL drive is standing by. The FTL drive, Lucia said. Are you sure the modifications will work? They will work. There was confidence in Dimitri's voice. The confidence of a man who had rebuilt the impossible. The drive cannot make long jumps anymore, but short jumps. We can blink across a battlefield faster than any ship in the galaxy. Lucia opened her eyes. Through the main view screen, she could see the Veth swarm. 100 ships moving in perfect formation, guided by a single hive mind. They had not even noticed the Defiance yet. One ship was beneath their attention. Commander? Colonel Rivera's voice came from the weapons station. What are your orders? Lucia smiled. It was not a human smile. It was something older. Something that remembered caves and darkness and the sound of predators in the night. It was the smile of a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and the violence of their own kind. A species that had never learned how to surrender. We are going to show them what happens when you corner a human, she said. We are going to show them why our ancestors painted monsters on cave walls. Not because we feared them. Her hands tightened on the armrests of her command chair. But because we were practicing, she pushed the throttle forward. The Defiance screamed toward the swarm. One ship against 100. A broken wreck against the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. Watching from a safe distance, the Thyrany observers recorded everything. They would send the footage back to the Concord as proof of humanity's foolishness. Another young species that had burned too bright and died too fast. The humans have chosen suicide, the lead observer transmitted. As we expected. Their species lacks the wisdom to know when a fight cannot be won. But as they watched the Defiance accelerate toward certain death, something strange began to happen. The ship was not slowing down. It was not trying to retreat. It was accelerating faster and faster, pushing its engines beyond their rated limits. And as it drew closer to the swarm, the observers noticed something else. The Defiance was not running toward death. It was running toward war. And somewhere in the darkness of space, aboard ships that had never known fear, the Veth swarm began to feel something new. A sensation that had not existed in their hive mind for 1,000 years. Doubt the monster was awake. And it was hungry. The Veth Queen mind floated at the center of its fleet. It's connected to 100 ships through threads of biological thought. It had consumed 12 civilizations. It had devoured billions of souls. It had faced warriors and heroes and desperate last stands, and it had crushed them all. When the single enemy vessel appeared on its sensors, the Queen Mind felt something close to amusement. One ship. Ancient design. No energy weapons detected. Negligible threat level. The Queen Mind classified the Defiance as irrelevant and turned its attention to the fleeing colony ships. Softer targets. Easier prey. The real feast was waiting. That was its first mistake. The Defiance closed to weapons range in silence. Lucia Vance sat in her command chair, but her mind was elsewhere. It was spread across the entire ship, feeling every system, sensing every weapon, breathing with the reactor's fire. She was not commanding the Defiance. She had become the Defiance, and the Defiance remembered what it was like to be a warship. Weapons range in 10 seconds, Colonel Rivera reported. Her voice was tight with tension. Everyone on the bridge understood what was about to happen. Either their modifications would work, or they would die in the next few minutes. Lucia opened her eyes. Through the view screen, she could see the nearest Veth ship. A destroyer, its chitin hull glistening with moisture. Its organic weapons pulsing with deadly light. "Fire," she said. The railgun spoke. 12 tungsten slugs, each the size of a man's fist, accelerated to 1% of the speed of light in less than a second. They crossed the gap between the ships in the blink of an eye. They hit the Veth destroyer's energy shields, and they passed straight through. The galaxy had abandoned kinetic weapons 10,000 years ago. Energy shields had made them obsolete. Every species knew this. It was fundamental military doctrine, as basic as the laws of physics. But the shields were designed to stop energy. Light, heat, radiation. They were not designed for solid matter moving at impossible speeds. The tungsten slugs punched through the shields like they did not exist. They tore through the destroyer's hull like paper. They ripped through its vital organs and exploded out the other side. The Veth destroyer died in seconds. It did not explode dramatically. It simply went dark, its biological systems failing, its hull drifting dead and cold. The Queen Mind recoiled in shock. Impossible. The enemy weapons were primitive, outdated. How could they penetrate Veth shields? How could they cause such damage? Reassess threat level. Reassess immediately. But before the swarm could adapt, the Defiance did something even more impossible. It vanished. The modified FTL drive activated. The ship blinked out of existence. One moment, it was at the edge of the formation. The next moment, it reappeared in the center of the swarm, surrounded by hive ships on all sides. The railguns fired again. 3 more destroyers died. Then the Defiance blinked again. And again. And again. It was everywhere and nowhere. It appeared behind a cruiser and tore its engines apart, then vanished before return fire could find it. It materialized beside a carrier and killed it with a single volley, then disappeared into the void. It moved through the swarm like a ghost, striking without warning, gone before the enemy could react. The Queen Mind had never faced anything like this. For 1,000 years, it had fought predictable enemies, species that formed battle lines, species that followed rules, species that could be understood and anticipated and destroyed. Humans did not follow. Rules, Lucia. Vance felt the battle through the ship's sensors. She felt every shot like a punch thrown in a street fight. She felt every kill like a predator's triumph. The ship's ancient anger merged with her own determination, and together they became something new. Something terrible. Something the galaxy had never seen before. "They are trying to surround us," she said. Her voice was calm, almost dreamy. "They think if they trap us, they can kill us." "Can they?" Dmitri asked. He was watching the reactor readings, making sure the engines did not burn out from the constant FTL jumps. Lucia smiled. "They are welcome to try." The Defiance blinked into the middle of the closing trap and fired in all directions at once. 4 hive ships died in a single second. Then the ship blinked again, leaving nothing but corpses behind. An hour passed. Then 2, then 3. The Thyrani observers watched in stunned silence. They had expected a quick death, a brief, futile resistance, followed by inevitable defeat. Instead, they were witnessing something that should not be possible. The Veth swarm was losing. The Queen Mind sent command after command. It tried to coordinate its ships. It tried to predict the enemy's movements. It tried to adapt to weapons that should not work and tactics that should not exist. Nothing helped. The humans were not fighting like any species the Queen Mind had encountered. They were not trying to win through superior firepower or numbers or technology. They were fighting like animals. Like predators. They struck at weak points and disappeared. They exploited every opening. They showed no mercy and expected none in return. It was chaos. Pure, beautiful, terrifying chaos. And in that chaos, the swarm could not survive. By the 4th hour, 63 Veth ships were debris. Their broken hulls drifted through space, cold and dead. The remaining 37 had clustered together, shields overlapping, weapons pointing outward in all directions. They were afraid. The Veth swarm, which had never known fear, was finally learning what it felt like to be prey. Lucia Vance sat in her command chair and looked at the surviving ships. The Defiance was damaged. Scorch marks covered its hull where Veth weapons had found their mark. Several compartments had been breached. A dozen crew members were dead, but the ship was still alive. Still fighting? Still hungry, Commander? Colonel Rivera said quietly. We have one. They cannot hurt us anymore. We can let them go. Lucia considered this. She felt the ship's thoughts mixing with her own. The ancient anger. The memory of abandonment. The desire for revenge. But she also felt something else. Something human. Mercy. Open a channel, she said. All frequencies. The communication officer looked surprised, but obeyed. Lucia's voice echoed across the battlefield, reaching every surviving Veth ship. This is Commander Lucia Vance of the UES Defiance. You have 2 choices. Leave this system now and never return, or stay and die. She paused. You have 1 minute to decide. Silence. The swarm ships hung motionless in space. Then, one by one, they began to turn away. Their engines fired. Their FTL drives activated. They fled into the void, broadcasting a single message to the rest of the swarm. Do not enter human space. Do not engage human ships. Apex predator detected. Avoid at all costs. Lucia watched them go. The battle was over. Humanity had survived. But as she disconnected from the neural interface and felt herself become human again, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy had learned. A new lesson today. Humans were not prey. They were monsters. The news spread across the galaxy like fire on 1,000 worlds. Beings of every shape and size watched the battle recordings with growing disbelief. They saw a single ship tear through the Veth swarm like a blade through water. They saw ancient tactics made new. They saw weapons that should have been useless, destroy enemies that should have been invincible. They saw humanity. When in the great council chambers of the Galactic Concord, the elder species gathered in emergency session. The Thyrany ambassador stood at the center, his crystal body flickering with colors that none of the other races had ever seen before. Colors that meant confusion, fear, and something that looked remarkably like shame. How is this possible? The Morthani delegate demanded. She was a tall being with skin like bark and eyes like burning coals. Her species had fought the Veth for centuries without success. We gave them a broken ship. A corpse. They should have died. They did not die, the Thyrany ambassador replied quietly. They adapted. But the weapons, kinetic projectiles, we abandoned those 10,000 years ago. They cannot work against modern shields. Apparently, they can. The ambassador's crystals flickered with that shameful color again. We never tested them. We assumed our shields were invincible. We were wrong. Silence fell over the chamber. For the first time in millennia, the ancient species of the Galactic Concord were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. They had grown. Old, complacent. They had stopped innovating because they believed they had already discovered everything worth discovering. They had looked at humanity and seen only primitives, insects crawling out of the mud. They had not seen the danger. What do we do now? The Morthani delegate asked. The Thyrany ambassador turned toward the view screen. where the image of the Defiance hung against the stars. Broken, but unbowed. Scarred, but victorious. "Go to Earth," he said, "and we apologize." 3 weeks later, the ambassador's ship entered Earth's solar system. It was the most advanced vessel in the Concorde's fleet, capable of destroying entire planets. But as it approached Earth's orbital station, its weapons were powered down. Its shields were lowered. It came in peace. Commander Lucia. Vance was waiting. She stood in the same cargo bay where she had received the discarded blade 6 months earlier. But everything else had changed. She was no longer a desperate officer, begging for scraps from superior beings. She was a hero. The woman who had saved humanity, the monster who had made the swarm afraid. When the Thyrany ambassador's hologram appeared before her, there was no amusement in his crystalline form. No condescension. Only respect. "Commander Vance," he said, "I have come to speak on behalf of the Galactic Concorde." Lucia nodded but said nothing. She let the silence stretch, forcing the ambassador to continue. "We have reviewed the battle recordings," he said carefully. "We have studied your modifications to the vessel we provided. We have analyzed your tactics and your weapons and your—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Your creativity. And what conclusions have you reached?" The ambassador's crystals shifted into patterns that Lucia recognized as deep discomfort. "We have concluded that we made a serious error in judgment. We believed humanity was too young, too primitive to pose any threat or offer any value. We were wrong." Lucia felt a small spark of satisfaction, but she kept her face neutral. "Go on, the Concorde wishes to offer humanity a new arrangement. Full membership in our alliance. Access to all our technology without restriction. And a permanent seat on the War Council." The ambassador paused. "We believe your species has insights that we lack. You mean you need us?" For a long moment, the ambassador did not respond. Then, slowly, his crystals shifted into a pattern that Lucia had never seen before. A pattern of humility. "Yes," he admitted. "We need you. The Veth Swarm will return. They will adapt to your weapons, learn from their defeat, and come back stronger. When that day comes, we will need warriors who can think like humans, who can improvise, who can turn broken tools into instruments of victory." Lucia considered his words. Through the viewport behind her, she could see the Defiance being towed into the repair docks. Engineers were already swarming over its hull, studying every modification, preparing to build more ships like it. 6 months ago," she said quietly, "you gave us a corpse and called it a gift. You expected us to die quietly. You did not even bother to send help when the swarm arrived." She turned to face the ambassador directly. "Why should we trust you now?" The ambassador's crystals flickered. "You should not," he said. "Trust must be earned, and we have done nothing to deserve yours. All I can offer is honesty. The Concorde made a mistake. We underestimated your species. We will not make that mistake again." Lucia studied him for a long moment. She thought about the crew members who had died in the battle, the colonies that had almost burned, the children who had almost been devoured, but she also thought about the future, about humanity's place in the galaxy, about the threats that were still out there, waiting in the darkness between stars. "The Defiance stays ours," she said finally. "It will never belong to the Concorde. That ship earned its freedom." "Agreed. We build our own fleet. Our own designs. We do not become dependent on your technology." "Agreed." "And one more thing." Lucia stepped closer to the hologram, her eyes hard as starlight. "You will remember this day. You will remember what happens when you underestimate humans, and you will make sure every species in the galaxy learns the same lesson." The ambassador bowed his crystalline head. "What lesson is that?" Lucia smiled. It was not a threatening smile. It was simply honest. "That we are not your pets," she said. "We are not your students. We are not your charity case. We are your equals. And the next time someone hands us junk, they should pray that we stay friendly. Because humans do not just survive, Ambassador." She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the room. "We overcome." The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then his crystals shifted into a pattern that Lucia recognized as genuine respect. "I believe," he said slowly, "that humanity will be the most important addition to the Concord in 10,000 years. Not because of your weapons or your tactics, but because you remind us of something we had forgotten." "What is that?" "That the universe is not safe. That progress requires struggle. That comfort breeds weakness." His crystals brightened. "You remind us how to be afraid, and that fear will make us stronger." He bowed again, and his hologram flickered out. Lucia stood alone in the cargo bay, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Veth swarm was rebuilding. Somewhere out there, other threats were waiting to be discovered. The galaxy was vast and dangerous and full of wonders, and humanity was finally ready to face it. Behind her, the Defiance hung in its dock, scarred and silent. But Lucia knew it was not sleeping. It was waiting. Patient and proud and hungry for the next battle. They had handed humanity junk, and humanity had sent back a monster of war. It was, she thought, only the beginning.